Galileo and his times. The new developments in both physics and astronomy came to focus in the writings of Galileo Galilei. This great scientist was born at Pisa in 1564, the year of Michelangelo's death and Shakespeare's birth. Galileo was the son of a nobleman from Florence and he acquired his father's active interest in poetry, music, and the classicals. His scientific inventiveness also began to show itself early. For example, as a young medical student at the University of Pisa, he constructed a simple pendulum type timing device for the accurate measurement of pulse rates. Lured from medicine to physical science by reading Euclid and Archimedes, Galileo quickly became known for his unusual activity. At the age of 26, he was appointed professor of mathematics at Pisa. There, he showed an independence of spirit unmellowed by tact or patience. Soon after his appointment, he began to challenge the opinions of his older colleagues, many of whom became his enemies. Indeed, he left Pisa before his term was completed, apparently focused out by financial difficulties and by his enraged opponents. Later, at Padua in the Republic of Venice, he began his work in astronomy. His support of the sun centered theory of the universe eventually brought him additional enemies, but it also brought him immortal fame. Drawn back to his native province of Tuscany in 1610 by a generous offer of the Grand Duke, Galileo became the court mathematician and philosopher, a title which he chose himself. From then until his death at 78 in 1642, he produces much of his excellent work. Despite endless family troubles, occasional brushes with poverty, and quarrels with his enemies, he continued his research, teaching, and writing. Galileo gave us a new mathematical orientation toward the natural world. His philosophy of science had its roots in the ancient Greek tradition of Pythagoras, Plato, and Archimedes, but it was majorly in conflict with the qualitative approach characteristics of Aristotle. Unlike most of his predecessors, however, Galileo respected the test of truth provided by quantitative observation and experiment. Galileo's early writings on mechanics, the study of the behavior of matter under the influence of forces, were in the tradition of the standard medieval theories of physics. Although he was keenly aware of the shortcomings of those theories, his chief interest during his mature years was in astronomy. However, when his important astronomical work, Dialogue on the Two Great World Systems, 1632, was condemned by the Roman Catholic Inquisition and he was forbidden to teach the new astronomy. Galileo decided to concentrate on mechanics. His work led to his book, Discourses and Mathematical Demonstrations concerning two new sciences pertaining to mechanics and locomotion. usually referred to as the two new sciences. The new approach to the science of motion described in the two new sciences signaled the beginning of the end not only of the medieval theory of mechanics but also of the entire Aristotelian cosmology. Galileo was old, sick, and nearly blind at the time he wrote two new sciences, yet his style in it is sprightly and delightful. He used the dialogue from to allow a lively conversation between three speakers. Simplicio, who represents the Aristotelian view, Salviati, who presents the new views of Galileo different from Aristotle, and Sagrado, the uncommitted man of goodwill and open mind, eager to learn. To no one's surprise, Salviati leads his companions to Galileo's views. We might say that learning what to ignore has been almost as important in the growth of science as learning what to take into account. In one particular case from two new sciences, Galileo's explanation depended on his being able to imagine how an object would fall if there were no air resistance. This may be easy for us who know of vacuum pumps, but in Galileo's time it was an explanation unlikely to be accepted because of the basic beliefs held by most educated people. For them, as for Aristotle, common sense said that air resistance is always present in nature. Thus, a feather and a coin could never fall at the same rate. Why should one talk about hypothetical motions in a vacuum when a vacuum does not exist? Physics said Aristotle and his followers should describe the real world as we observe it, not some imaginary world which can never be found. Aristotle's physics had dominated Europe since the 13th century, not merely because of the authority of the Catholic Church, as is sometimes said, but also because many intelligent scientists were convinced that it offered the most rational method for describing natural phenomena. To overthrow such a firmly established doctrine required much more than writing reasonable arguments or simply dropping heavy and light objects from a tall building, as Galileo is supposed to have done in his legendary experiment on the Leaning Tower of Pisa. It demanded Galileo's unusual combination of mathematical talent, experimental skill, literary style, and tireless campaigning to defeat Aristotle's theories and to get on the path to modern physics.